interesting. I was going to ask you a question about the deep state, but you had already answered that. And then I was going to talk about Hillary Clinton, how well connected she is to the military-industrial complex.
Oh yeah, I mean, and so is Elizabeth Warren, by the way.
I was going to ask you about that too. And my question to you would be, how is now, when Elizabeth Warren won, had I been her first election to Senate, had I lived in Massachusetts, I would have absolutely not only voted for her, but campaigned for her. Yeah, but how is it that a progressive can move then to be in support of an obvious neoliberal corporatist like Hillary Clinton? But
see, the lesson I learned as an 18-year-old kid, I think many Americans also need to learn, and that's this. For far too long, American politics has been Tweedledee and Tweedledum. So you have the establishment, which has two heads to it: the overt establishment and then the not so obvious establishment. And then there are actual people's movements. Change has always come about. Susan B. Anthony was laughed out of the Democratic majority House, right? They thought she was crazy. She went to the streets. The civil rights movement wasn't Lyndon B. Johnson or Martin Luther King, right? It was people's names who we do not know, right? And when you look at political dynamics, the establishment exists, which is two heads, and then you have movements. And in the current, and you can see it over and over again. So Hillary Clinton was a clear establishment. Donald Trump, whether people like it or not, was reflecting a movement of people who felt that they were disenfranchised. And in between that was a not so obvious establishment of Bernie Sanders. A lot of my friends said, Shiva, why don't you vote for Bernie? I said, look, he's going to do exactly what Jesse Jackson did. He's part of the not so obvious establishment. And the not so obvious establishment is very clever. They use the rhetoric of revolution, change. They're going to fight for the small guy.
Well, I'll tell you, I was really disappointed, for instance, after Massachusetts, and then later in Arizona, California, when you look at what was done. I mean, that was a primary stolen from him, and why he sat there at the convention and allowed her to accept that nomination without fighting it, I was really befuddled.
He's part of the not so obvious establishment. This is a recurrent process that people need to understand, otherwise they keep getting bamboozled. I had a friend of mine, she said, I'm going to vote for Bernie, you should vote for him. I said, look, Bernie's going to sell you out. She hung up the phone on me, was angry as hell. Well, that's exactly what he did. You have to understand, you have to look at it like physics. There are these three motions, dynamics. There are three gears in play. And, you know, in India, same thing. And you can look at it. The British colonialism was the establishment in the 20s. There was a huge revolutionary movement of people to get rid of the British forcibly, which would have been a good revolution. India never had one. And then they flew in Gandhi, literally parachuted him in. He's part of the not so obvious establishment. And he perpetuated the caste system. He perpetuated Indian corruption through the Indian overlords. You know, white men with crowns left India, and you have brown men with white hats take over. And this is how clever the deep state is. It's got its two levers that they use to stop independent movements. And if you can understand that dynamic, you can always see through the nonsense. Elizabeth Warren is the face of the deep state. She is part of the not so obvious establishment. Look at her record. She supported Dodd-Frank, which really emboldened big banks, destroyed Community Bank. She supported Romney Care and Obamacare, which emboldened big pharma. And on top of it, she's the one who wrote a letter to Chuck Hagel after the military said they weren't going to take certain weapons and said they should be accepted. You see, that's what these people are. And what's really disgusting about people like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie, it's easy to see people like Hillary, for example, right? Or the so-called right wing. But what's really unfortunate is these people, because they're the real racists, they're the real imperialists, and they're the real globalists. Because throughout history, that not so obvious establishment bamboozles the masses. You know, in Russia, Lenin called them the Mensheviks. You know? They always don't want to really do what's necessary. They didn't really want to overthrow the Tsar, right? They thought you could ameliorate things because they're part of the establishment. So
somehow they'd be a contingent beneficiary of that next wave of leaders that would come along.
Yeah, and they're the most elitist people, you know, in Boston. I mean, look, our campaign has become the real Indian versus a fake Indian. And it's a very interesting thing. Everyone laughs at it, whether you're not so educated or the most educated, because it hits at a core and fundamental truth that all of these politicians are fake.